It's beautiful to see you, and I'm really happy to have Esther with us today, because her work is exciting, and I think you heard bits and pieces of her biography, and we'll see it coming in through the paintings, through the works, and bringing in questions really of the artist also is like, where does the identity come in? Who is the community? What are the influences? So all of these things will fall into place actually as we look at the paintings, and will become, I'd say, less theoretical words and more something to enjoy and understand. So we're jumping right in. Before I go into biography and stuff like that, and we're going to view most of Esther's works in a linear historical way. I'll say that our time together, our hour or maybe a little bit more, will be kind of 35 minutes approximately of me kind of taking you through Esther's work, and then transitioning into a conversation with Esther about her work, and then opening up for questions. If you do have questions as you go along, pop them in the chat. I probably won't see them immediately, but Ari will see if there's anything crucial, and he'll interrupt me if there's a question that's really important for me to address at that moment. So we're looking at one of a group of works from 2005, and this group of works is called The Painter, the Rabbis, and Their Belongings. The first, just even the title of this, I don't know if for any of you it kind of resonates with The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. For me it does, in this fairy tale world. And we're looking at a portrait of a rabbi. You can see the name, the title of this work, Godly Kabbalist, which is actually a real human being. And we're going to see the next few works from this same series, and talk a little about what's going on here, who are these people, and kind of what did Esther do with these paintings. So you're seeing the titles of these paintings are actually the titles of the rabbis that they're depicting, but the way they're painted is very different from the way you'd expect to see rabbis' paintings. The colors, there's something between, I think, the beast or the animal and between the feminine in the way they're painted. Now, these paintings come from a very specific local Israeli tradition, because these are all rabbis that are mystics, and that it's very customary to encounter photos of these rabbis in various places in Israel, and many times in falafel shops or shawarma shops. And you might think of it in a similar way that if you walk into a diner in the US, then you have celebrity shots all over the diner. So this would be our local take on that, with these photos hanging in these shops. Is kind of a good luck charm. And I'm showing you, these are actually the people that are painted in the three paintings we just saw, and that are very, very famous from different places. This is actually a mystic from Germany, the Baba Sali, and Ben Ish Chai, who's from Baghdad, from Iraq. So different traditions, but all very kind of, I'd say, imagery that people in Israel are used to encounter, but nothing to do with what is considered art. The photographs are usually very poor quality hanging. And Esther is taking this imagery that is kind of not part of the fine arts world and playing with it and creating it to be her own. And I'll say this, in Israel, like in most places in the world, the art world is usually, I'd say, secular and liberal and left, and it doesn't really mix much with religion. Things have been changing in the last decade, but we're looking at these works that are from 2005, 2006, and they're actually pretty revolutionary in the way of bringing in these images from religion, but also from what we'd consider low culture in terms of not part of the fine arts world, and bringing them into the arts world and playing with them as a subject matter, and really acknowledging that culture. And we're already touching on something that Esther is bringing with her, since she grew up in a family, as Ari mentioned, she was born in Russia, then came to Israel, grew up in a family where religion was a very central part, with a father that kind of one of the great minds and thinkers in Jewish philosophy, and in religious schooling. So there's this access to all this imagery. I also just want to mention, you can see this, if I go next, it looks kind of, how did she get there? But I want to show you this etching from the 18th century that is based on this rabbi. And then if you see the lineage, and the reason I'm showing this to you, because we'll see that Esther is almost like, I'd say, the Indiana Jones treasure hunting for visual Jewish imagery. And there's this beauty about being able to decipher and see. And, you know, for me, it's interesting because this is an image, Estelle didn't share it with me. I just went treasure hunting because of her paintings and looking for where these images come from. And I find myself seeing these things. And in this journey we're going to go through together, we're slowly going to open all of these visual riddles and see how it's weaved within our tradition, and also how her community is this wide variety of different traditions. This is still from the series, The Rabbis, the Books, the Paint of the Rabbis and Their Belongings. We can see the books here. Sefer Kodesh is the title that Esther gives it also in English, even though that's actually Hebrew transliteration, meaning holy books. And you can see again here in the way that they're painted, there's something very ornamental, very fairy tale-like, very delicate about them. And she kind of gives them this, I'd say, status of holiness just by giving them the full painting, right? And we're slowly opening up the different elements that Estelle uses in, or her vocabulary of painting. We're looking here at two additional paintings, and you can see here this painting on the left, Vessels Sunken in Fluid. And I want to talk a little about this idea of vessels, because it's a very essential idea within Jewish mysticism. According to Jewish Kabbalah, the world was created by God pouring light into a vessel. It was too much, the vessel shattered, and kind of the light fell into this world, and our work as humans in this world is actually collecting and elevating these shards of light. So the idea of vessels within Jewish mysticism is very, very essential, and Esther is playing here with them. And also you can see they're not necessarily broken, but they're breaking the painterly plane. Also the diamond, which we're going to encounter as we go along. So we're just kind of creating this vocabulary that Estelle will continue using in her paintings. This is also relating again to the group or the series of works, the painter, the rabbi, and their belongings. And we're looking here at a self-portrait. We see the books again, and we see here the painter with her eye peeping at us. And as the view is, and we're going to encounter this quite often in Esther's painting, she kind of flips the gaze on us, because we're the viewers looking at the painting, but very often we'll have the painting looking back at us and asking about this relationship, and in a way demanding this look. And here we have She-Ape Painter. And you can see it's kind of a self-portrait, and there are a few things about it. If you think of it, artists in a way, they mimic reality, or they play with the mimicking of reality. If you think of apes, apes mimic what they see, but without the self-consciousness or embarrassment. There's this joy of imitation that is in it. There isn't the shame. Right. The other thing we see in the way this is painted that there's no differentiation between hair and fur, and we're going to see that the motif of hair and paintbrush come up again and again. You can even see in this painting also the way the hair is painted. And if you take a look on the screen at Esther, you can see her hair and kind of understand why why that is also a very prominent feature in her works. Okay. And again, we're looking, and we can already see this thing. We have here the eyes looking at us, right? A painting gazing at us, and the diamond located where the third eye would be, where the opening would be, taking also from additional traditions, or if you think of Eastern Far East traditions, and this idea of the third eye. mirrors. This is the same size as the previous one. And look what happens here. It's called mirrors, but there's no mirror. We're looking at empty space. And we can see how Esther is also actually using the whiteness of the paper to come through. And we see how the painting is comprised of what is painted, but also the negative space, what isn't painted, what is happening between the lines. And you might be able to, if some of you maybe know the Midrash about how the Torah, how the was written, it is said in the stories that it was written Esh Chora al Gabei Esh Levana, black fire upon white fire. And so the negative space, the words and the space where they're in, they both act as to bring together a whole. And we can see here that Esther is playing with that, what is painted as and what is not. And in this mirror that is in the mirror, we, in a way, are left to fill the blanks. We're seeing here 3 paintings, also very long, long ones, with these kind of architectural structures. And you can see also the titles. And if you think of them, there's something very religious about all of them. They might remind us of iconic kind of paintings, a little more Christian possibly. And maybe I'll also mention here that within our context, when the title of this session is called Religion, Gender, and Mysticism, we all assume we're talking about Judaism. Which is an interesting thing, because if I were talking anywhere else and I said religion, it could be Christianity, it could be Islam, it could be other religions. But we are mainly within the Jewish religious world, although we'll see how we're going to take some trips along some other religions too. So we're looking here at a painting from a larger series of beasts and bales, and this work is called Curtain with a Tiger. And we can see that in each painting almost there's this play upon what we see. Okay, so Esther is dealing not only with her own kind of motifs and inspiration and stuff, but she's constantly turning towards us, the viewer, and playing with our own eyesight. The other thing, if you notice, it's written here, it's pastels, ink, and watercolor and paper. For those of you who happen to paint, you know, we're not supposed to mix those because they don't mix well. There's these tons and tons of rules of how to work with oils and not mix them with water. If you do, what layer comes upon what layer, because it has to do with archival art. And Esther is kind of taking all this aside, dropping it, and kind of doing what she wants in this painting. And the way it's created is actually kind of, it's not, I'll say this, it's not an illusion. It was actually first painted, the ink and the watercolors on the paper with this tiger, then the floor. And then with the pastel oils, she went on top creating the curtain that at first completely covered the tiger. And only then did she scrape with a ruler, she scraped away the pastels to create this kind of veil. And if we think of a veil or a curtain or fabric, once again, it touches quite immediately within Jewish tradition from the way the Mishkan, the mobile temple in the desert, was built mainly of stretches of fabric, to, if you think of a synagogue, all the fabric that is covering the ark, covering the bima, where we see fabric all the time. And if we take it another step within Orthodox synagogues, we have the mechitza, the separation between men and women, that is very often created by fabric. And another thing that for me is also comes to mind when I see this is in religious and Orthodox religious weddings, the bride is veiled. And the veil has kind of two aspects. On the one hand, it's hiding her from others, but on the other hand, it's creating a kind of safe space within. So we have this veil, behind it, we have this beast ready, possibly ready to pounce, and in front of him, this very, very delicate veil. So we're moving a little forward in time to 2009 to these two works, which I love. And they're called Menorah, after a drawing by Maimonides. So let's figure this out. So Menorah, most of you are familiar with the Chanukiah, which is the more modern rendition of the biblical menorah that was in the temple. But the shape that most of us know is this shape, right? The four rounded shapes of the menorah. And I assume that most of us haven't seen a menorah looking like this. Where does it come from? It actually looks more like a geometric, maybe cubist bouquet of flowers. If not, actually, when I first saw it, I was like, oh, this looks like a kebab and shawarma sticks. So what's going on here? And Esther actually went back in time to texts written by Maimonides. Maimonides, or the Rambam, Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon, a very prominent rabbi, scholar, thinker, and doctor, mainly residing in Egypt, writing the most extensive texts within Jewish tradition and philosophy. Possibly one of the most famous one is Guide for the Perplexed, Moreh Nevuchim. And he creates within his text an illustration of the temple menorah. This is actually something existing in his texts. And Esther kind of takes that and creates a new painting for it, and in a way excavates this lost image. Now, for me, it's also really important to say there's this tendency to say that Jews don't have a visual history in art because of the commandment of lo ta'aseh lechapes el kol masecha, do not create a sculpture and a mosque, and Jews are the people of the book, and we don't have visual imagery, which is something that really isn't entirely true from like the imagery in the Bible, and I'm just thinking even of giving of the Torah and Mount Sinai and the description of the nation of Ha'am ro'eh et hakolot, the people are seeing the voices, and all the way to this, and we suddenly get the richness that we actually do have, and Esther brings it forward here in these very, very vibrant colors, and we'll see that this geometry actually weaves into her works and will pull in another community that Esther draws inspiration from. We're seeing here two more paintings and thinking again about the mosque or the veil. And specifically in this one, you can see Rasputin with a white heart. Rasputin was at the end of the 18th century, beginning of the 19th century, kind of a mystic healer. Some would say he was a religious charlatan. It depends who you'd ask. Way back when in Russia, very, very influential. And Esther is taking kind of leaning back into the Russian history, taking his image and creating on him this heart-shaped mosque. And again, the way it's painted is that actually if you'd scrape away the mosque, you'd have the full face. So it's not kind of painted initially with the mosque, but rather painted in the layers. And if I played a little so that you can kind of see the image of Rasputin behind this. We're moving into two portraits. One is a self-portrait here on the right of Esther, and on the left we have a portrait of her sister, her younger sister, Perl. And you can see here a few things. First of all, on the one hand, we have the geometry, the very clear-cut lines, which will meet and kind of lean into Cubist, but mainly is into Russian constructivism and suprematist art, which we'll talk about in a moment. But we also have the extremely soft hair that is kind of breaking all that harshness. Here we also have these peacock feathers, which come kind of into Esther's art quite often, and she speaks of them as a way for nature to paint eyes. It's like eyes that aren't eyes that we meet in nature. And we're looking here at another portrait that Esther created, Rebbetzin Chaya Mushka. She was actually the wife of the last rabbi of Chabad, the Lubavitcher rabbi. And a portrait of this woman was hanging in Esther's school. So it becomes kind of also part of the imagery that she sees. Again, here it almost looks like she's in a fairy tale. And you can see here in the original photo, there was a bowl of fruit, but here you can see that what she's holding is actually a paintbrush. I'm assuming the nails in the portrait also weren't looking like that. And I want to share with you a short text, and this is from the book by Esther, and it's a text Esther wrote. We'll get to it at the end. And she says, the group of portraits unfolds a cultural community comprised of men and women, rabbis, both real and imagined, angels, family members, and women painters, as well as self-portraits. Underlying this community is a constant movement between the human and the animalistic, the male and the female. There's this thing about who we choose to create portraits of, who are the faces that we hang around us. If you think even in your own home of what photos you have around, it's kind of how we gather our community around us, even if they're not physically around us. And by deciding this and by painting this portrait, Estelle puts her at the same level as the other rabbis. She's bringing her in as part of her community and inspiration. Now, I'm just peeping, okay. I wanted you for a moment to see what the works look like when they're exhibited, because there can be something very tricky about seeing the paintings like this on the screen. So this is an exhibition view. We saw this painting, and we're going to talk about these two paintings in a moment. The name of this exhibition was Keshet B'Se'ara Shel Kuruvit, a rainbow in a cherubine's hair. And I want to say a few words about the title because it's playful and fun and really amusing, and it doesn't translate. So a cherub are these little angels that we know from Christianity, but also in Jewish religion, we have them on the ark. And they're called cherubs. In Hebrew, kuruv. So kuruv in Hebrew is a cherub, but it's also a cabbage, okay? It's just the same word. Cherubine in Hebrew, cherubine is also a kind of invented word, feminizing the word cherub. In Hebrew, the right way grammatically to do that is actually to call it kuruvit, okay? That would be the ending in Hebrew that will make it into feminine. But kuruvit in Hebrew is actually a cauliflower. So we just transitioned from a cabbage to a cauliflower. And you see here, Keshet B'Se'ara Shel Kuruvit, a rainbow in a cherubine's hair. In Hebrew, Keshet is in fact a rainbow, but Keshet is also a headband that we'd use just to gather our hair back or as an ornament. So we get here in Hebrew this funny, playful double meaning, which isn't only a rainbow in a cherubine's hair, it's also a headband in a cauliflower's hair. So it's this play that is, I think, brings a lot of smile, to the works, not taking them too seriously. And we can see the painting, which is actually a self-portrait of Esther. And we can see once again the veil, right, in a different way, the covering the veil, but it becomes also an ornament. And if you look carefully, we can actually see that when Esther paints, the paintbrush itself is leaving the mark as a material. If you think of it, a paintbrush is made of hairs, right? And she's painting the hairs and the fabric in a way that really allows the paintbrush to bring forth what it is and leave its mark. So she's creating with kind of the tools what they, I'd say, want to say. So we're kind of shifting to a slightly different world. We're looking and we're going to play around with who else is part of this community that Estelle gathers around herself. We're looking at this work, tablets, which obviously are alluding to the tablets given to Moses from God to take down to the people. And the way this painting is created, I mean, it's not the shape of the tablets that we might see in the kind of classical rendition, but rather two square tablets, which actually that description does exist within Jewish tradition. And we see this kind of fireworks movement between them. And what I want to do, we're going to see kind of also now in some works, the different inspirations and associations that Esther is taking. So we have this very large painting called Annunciation. We see the geometry, we see the arches going in. If you know art history extremely well, then the moment we see the word Annunciation, we know there's a whole kind of set of art history that goes under that name. And Esther, again, with the title, she's giving us kind of, here's the clue, go find what's going on. So this I'm going to do with you, because, So this is the Annunciation by Franz Angelico, one of the most famous, and you can see where the arches come from. On this one, on the original one, you can see they're in this space, right? And we have the garden, a small space for the garden on the left side, whereas the painting itself has more of the space on the right side. Here you can see it a little more clearly. And what I wanted to do for you, so I flipped the painting for you, which is basically what Esther did. She flipped the painting. We can see now how all the arches sit in place. And we understand that she's giving the garden way, way more space. And the other thing that basically she's doing, she took away the imagery, right? So we're kind of taking the Christian kind of mythology and the Annunciation, and Esther is leaving us with the space, both the natural, the garden, and the indoors, but taking away the people, leaving us with the abstract understanding in a way of God. And we're going to see how she plays with these various religious symbols that do move between traditions. We're looking here at the painting, the foundation stone. The foundation stone is within Jewish tradition or mythology. The belief is that the world, the center of the world is on Mount Moriah, and the world was created from the foundation stone, Even Hashtiyah, which is in Mount Moriah. And she paints this over here. And if you think of a cube is also something we'd encounter, for instance, in Islam, when people go to Mecca to go around the Kaaba, this very pure form, right? And we're seeing here another work, a table at the studio. And what I want to do, we're going to take a little trip, because again, these titles are kind of an invitation for us to see what's happening. And a table at the studio is something that happens a lot in art history. So I'm taking you on a tiny trip here to tables in the studio, and then we'll go back to Esther's, I'd say, Jewish table in the studio. So these are almost random picks I made because there's so many, because artists paint what is around them. If you ever thought, why is everyone on Instagram taking photos of their food? Look, people did that way back when. They just painted their food. And you can see in these works, and they're from a specific kind of a few decades, when we can see Cubist art coming in, this dissection of planes, giving up perspective in favor of trying to capture everything that is happening on the same plane. So our eyes wouldn't see like this, the above and below, but the artists are actually kind of warping eyesight in favor of capturing all of the scene in one painting. One moment, I'll go back. So when Esther paints a table at the studio, she's playing with those notions. And I'll also say, within Jewish tradition, a table we eat and bless at is considered holy. There's a status to a table, and their rules about what can and can't come on the table, all the way to a saying that if a person sits next to a table and eats and didn't say words of Torah, it's as if ke'ilu achal zivchei metim. It's as if they ate some like treif for something that isn't worthy of eating. So there's a lot of kind of ideas around what a table is, because it's elevated, right? And it's also a place to, just to gather your stuff. Things pile up on a table. So if we look at what piles up on a table, we're looking here at a work called City on a Table Between Four Suns. And in brackets, you can see the name of this work is Jerusalem. And there are a few things that come into play over here. The first is actually another part of Esther's community, which comes into her works and inspiration, which are her children, and looking at the way kids paint and draw. And there is a stage when children draw and paint that they relate to the corner of the painting. Is like it's the edge, it's the end, and that's where they paint the sun. So you can see here Esther kind of started this painting with the same idea of how a child would paint the sun, allowing the rays to come in, creating this kind of net. The whole painting becomes a table. And in the center, and it's really interesting because on the one hand, she calls it Jerusalem. It's very easy for us to think of Jerusalem of gold. But if you think also of the childlike inspiration, it's also just the building blocks that kids play with. So again, we can look at this in both ways as this huge, beautiful idea of Jerusalem as a city of gold and the sun coming in, and also just as a mother looking at kid and giving place to the centrality of the way they see the world and play with it. Okay, I'm going to rush forward a little more so that we have time also for a conversation. We can see here more of the tables in the studio. You can see Esther's humor with the shoes over here and the table about to run away. And you can see this table, a constructivist Havdalah, the ceremony at the end of Shabbat with all the different parts of the ceremony. And why constructivist? And here she's pulling in more of her people. We're looking here at the design of the monument to the Third International by Vladimir Tatlin, which is one of the, I'd say, the major, if you think of Russian constructivist art movement, this is the image, and you can see very clearly how the Besamim box here just takes completely for that. And Esther is kind of pulling in all these different stories, identities into her works. Okay. What just happened here? So Esther doesn't only paint, she also creates installations working with fabric and string. And I'll say a few words about this and we'll go through these works. You can see here the name of this work is Suprematist Wall. In Hebrew, though, it's called Kotel Suprematisti. Kotel in Hebrew is also wall, but it is actually the Western Wall. So she's again playing with these two notions. And suprematism comes mainly from Malevich and El Lissitzky. We're talking about Lissitzky, Russian Jewish artist, extremely influential. He was artist, designer, architect, whatnot. In his very short lifespan that was just under 50 years, he was one of the most influential artists, especially on the graphic design world. And suprematism basically says that like shape and form are the pure way or is the supreme way to express emotions. They're kind of leaving aside the mimicking of the world in favor of pure emotions. If you think of it for a moment, if you've ever tried to express in words what you're feeling and found yourself lost for words, you might understand what these artists were trying to aim for. And you can see this work that Esther is playing with or in relation to. And you can see again the peacock feathers like eyes coming in to this work. These are a couple more installations created in the same way. And I just want you to see how these very, very thin strings, they're not so far from the way Esther uses her paintbrush, right? So we have it's happening in space, but it's a very similar way. And if you think of the veils, they exist here too. Moving forward, okay, maybe I'll say a word about this and another member of the community. You can see here my very first Jesus Conchita, which was the winner of the Eurovision contest in 2014, a trans woman. And you can see kind of the visual. And Esther also is moving between past and present, between all different religions, all different identities, pulling the people in. And I want to say a few words about this work, Afal Pi. And you can see here, we have the hair and we have kind of the nose is a very prominent geometrical feature in the face. Afal Pi in translation would be nevertheless. That's how we use it also in Hebrew. But actually, literally, af is nose, al is on, and pi is my mouth. So it means nose on my mouth, even though the expression itself does mean nevertheless. And again, there's a kind of playful wink towards this expression while taking the facial features and making them into this geometric form. I'm moving quite a lot forward because I want us to be in conversation, and I feel you're getting like the major importance parts. And a word about this painting called Tohu. It was just in the new acquisitions of the Tel Aviv Museum of Art. Tohu from Tohu Vavohu, right? So we know that from Genesis, the chaos of the world before it was formed. And you can see here a short sentence about what suprematism is. And I just want you to see something really beautiful. This is Malevich's very, very famous painting, Black Square, which for some of you, it might be like, what? How is this even art? But Malevich was very, very clear on what he was doing about the black on the white, capturing the emotion and the void it is in. And then you can see Esther's kind of, I'd say, to me, it struck me as the feminine, chaotic, contemporary interpretation of Malevich, where the white is no longer white, the square is no longer a square, and it's not about capturing pure, supreme, clear emotions, but rather somehow bringing to the front the mess of tohu, the chaos of what the world is. Okay. We're looking here at an exhibition view of rouge, or odem in Hebrew. Again, interesting because rouge is the color, and Hebrew odem is also the color, but it's also lipstick. And you can see here the works hanging. And I want to talk about a few of the works before we transition into a conversation with Esther. Some of them kind of you can just view, and I wanted to talk about this one, which actually wasn't in that exhibition. It exists in a different exhibition, but I really wanted you to see it. A beautiful, very long work. And if you look carefully, you can see it's actually a finger with a very long pink nail and this curl wrapped around it. It might remind us on the one hand of tefillin, but actually it's that movement of curling the hair of peot, right? And you can see what Esther herself wrote about this action, but you can also see how she's taking something that comes from the very masculine world, right? Because men grow their peot in the religious Hasidic Jewish tradition, and she's turning it completely feminine, right? With this pink nail and the coloring, and what comes from a very masculine specific tradition is becoming this feminine movement. We're seeing more of her works, and we'll kind of jump into conversation and then talk about them. And I just want to end with this one that's called Angel's Touch. You can see again the nose and the mouth, but here in real close-up, and the geometry, it almost looks like an architectural form. So we can also definitely think of all the Russian constructivist, cubist artists that we were just seeing. But actually, there's also a beautiful story in the Talmud that says that the fetus in the womb has the knowledge of everything. It's in the Talmud. It also describes all the stages, actually, the biological stages of the fetus. And then it says, Tinok b'me'i imo, a baby in his mother's womb, Yodea misof ha'olam v'ad sofo. He has the knowledge from the end of the world to the end of the world. Like everything is known to that fetus. And the legend or the mythology says that when the baby is born, an angel comes and smacks him over here and makes them forget everything. So as we start our steps in the world, everything we knew we forget, and then we need to relearn everything. And this Talmudic story basically says that this mark we all have here is the mark of that smack of the angel that made us forget everything, which basically means if you have this here, you once knew everything there was to know. So we can see how in this painting, which actually isn't such a large painting, it holds so much of Esther's kind of convoluted identity and community all kind of gathered into one. Okay, so what we're gonna do now, we're gonna transition into a conversation with Esther so we can get to hear her a little. And Esther, if you can unmute yourself. One moment here. Yeah, can you unmute?
Yeah, okay.
Hi. Okay, so maybe even before I look at the chat and kind of go in there, and this was a very kind of quick running through your works, I think the first thing I wanna ask you is there anything you feel you need to add to make this story complete? Like, what is missing for you with the...
Shirel, I think you were perfect. You are such a good lecturer. I can't ask for more. I feel it was interesting also for me, although I know everything.
So is there anything? Okay, so maybe there are a few things I want to ask you that I skipped kind of because I wanted you to say more about them. And the first is possibly about the series we saw with the rabbis, and they're painted ink on paper, but actually, and I'm going to go all the way back, and I love going back because then you can see how much you all know now. Like, these images now make sense, right? But there's actually a secret in the way that these were painted that you don't write. You write watercolor and ink on paper, but there's actually something else to them. And I think that also gives something of who you are as a painter. So if you can say a few words about that.
Okay, so actually, when I began painting, I tried to escape from my Russian teachers of Russian painting school that I learned in Israel, and I got a very thin paper from China, really thin, that you all have to work not on a table but on a carpet, on a leved, a fabric that it won't that will keep it dry. But I work with a lot of water, and I thought that it can be interesting to do something with the paper before I use watercolor and ink. So I tried something with fat, and it was milk. I took milk, waited, like here in this Yedidia Tia vial, you can see the white spots. Actually, it's the paper with the fat that were left after the milk was totally dry, and then it's like the fat, the oil. How would you say? Like, didn't let the water to get into the paper. So there's a sort of a secret inside, and it always in all my rabbis I used it, and also I thought about. White milk, it's like the language of the mother, or the first language that this newborn baby feels. The first communication is the milk. So it was something interesting. It was before I became a mother, but actually I became a mother when I was first exhibiting my first solo exhibition in 2008. So it was about being feminine in my painting, because like when I studied, it wasn't that way. It was very traditional, very like oriented, not gender oriented. It was we should avoid like we had to avoid how would you say it, ornamental things and etc. So this is about the
yeah. Maybe I'll put a little bit of that also in context, because Esther did her first degree actually in design, then went for 2 years to the Midrasha school in Beit Berl, which it's another like major art school in Israel, and then did her MFA with Bezalel. So basically she went through the different possibilities of art school in Israel. But yeah, there's a very... or at least there was a very clear set of what is okay to paint, how is it okay to paint, who are the references, and basically in your works, you went against all of that. Like, it's not what we were supposed or we were taught to paint. from where I'm standing, it seems things have been changing in the last years, and it's become more acceptable. Can you say a few words about that? How it is for you, or how it was then and how now?
I really, like, I feel at the beginning also the colorfulness of the paintings was really shocking that time, because Israeli painting was really poor in a way, and monochromatic, or maybe very pop, but not this kind of like my works looked really different, and I think it was on purpose. And now I'm really happy that it changes, and a lot of religious artists. I teach in several religious places where there are young religious artists that are trying their way, starting their way in the art world. So it's really, I really like this inclusive wave. I don't know how to say it.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of saying it. I'll just say I'm going to ask a few more questions, and if people want to pop questions in the chat, go ahead and do so. We were talking about all these identities you pull from as a woman, as a painter, someone connected to Russian tradition and history, religion. If you had to describe yourself or choose those identities, or how would you say that? Like, what would be, would there be a top one? Does that change with time? Like,
I think for me, the most important thing is to be playful with my identities and not to be attached to one of them, because we are all very complicated, and all this like choosing, I feel we have to celebrate the pluralism and and to play with these meanings and to shift it, because there are things I want to change in a way, like in my Soviet tradition, but I like it and I want to use it. And, you know, I really appreciate the playfulness. And I feel also for me, like also in the Hasidic teaching and in the mysticism, the way of playing, like as you really beautifully explained my expressions, like the names of my paintings, that's how you can play with also with identity and with things that are considered very strict, but you can see it in a new way, and then you can, you know, bring something good.
So I wanna kind of talk about two things that are happening now. One, and I asked you to send me, one moment, I have a couple of images from your studio. So they're quite poor in quality, but I still think it's fun to see what's going on now before the rest of the world gets to see it. One moment. Okay, so these are paintings. Yeah, you can see it's from the studio. Literally, I asked Estelle to like snap, to send me an iPhone photo. So this wouldn't usually, you know, be anywhere because it's not high quality. But these are the things you're working on right now. And if I understand correctly, the exhibition is opening next week. An exhibition that is alongside two other artists with Shai Chizkeli and Ziona Shimshi. And can you say a few words about these new works?
Yeah, it was works that I started in a printing gallery. Like it's based on monotypes, where I did a movement like with two big brushes. Like you can see in the beginning, a movement like how would you say dekel? I forgot. A palm tree. Yeah, a palm tree or a fountain. So it was two symmetric, like with two hands. I did this movement, and then I did several stains, and then they pressed it several times, and then I took it to my studio, and it was a play for me with the shapes and the thoughts about. I don't know, I thought about being together, like togetherness, and also, like you can see here, eucalyptus leaves. Mm-hmm. It was, I just found at my studio a small eucalyptus leaf, and then I decided to imitate it and to print it, to draw it with, it's pastels. to
I think it's also interesting because if I think of your works, in most of them, there's one image appearing, and suddenly here they're two facing each other, which is something I haven't seen in your works before, and interesting to think of them in light of the last 2 years and how much, there was the togetherness of the family unit and the aloneness with the world, and it's interesting to see it come to play here. What size are these?
They're really big. I don't know. I think in Hebrew it's 1.5 meter על 2 meters, something like this. 1.5 meters on 2 meters, or maybe a little less, but something like this. You can see the chair.
Right. The chair does help. The other thing I wanted you to show maybe is there's a new artist book of yours that just came out. So if you can just like pull it up to the screen so we can see it. You can see here also kind of the images that come from the painting but went through a rendition to this book. And can you say a few words about the book?
Yeah, actually it's my first artist book, and I tried to, it was designed especially with my works, and it is small, I thought about a prayer book or something that you can really, it's not heavy, but it's thick, and you can open it and take it with you.
The size of a siddur.
Yeah, that's the size.
That's amusing.
It's the size of my siddur, and it's many of my works, but in a logic of something that you can, how do you say ledafdef, to read it, or how would you say?
To leaf through. Can you show the book again? Yeah. I had here a comment that people weren't able to see the book, so I stopped the share so you can.
Okay, here it is. You can see it now. It's almost without text, or without any theoretical text, but only with small text I wrote. And in the end, there's everything translated to English, so you can also read it in English.
I think what's to me very beautiful, and it happens in the book too, is the text that Esther writes are two of the quotes about the community and the portraits that I wrote for you come from her own text, kind of taking the different motifs that appear in her paintings and giving her own words, lending her own interpretation, which I think is something very generous to do as an artist. And I'd say, in general, I think your art is very generous with the titles, with what it's giving us as viewers. It's demanding the look, but it's also giving a lot. And to see that in the book and to see your words is very beautiful.
Thank you. Someone asked me how did I do the cover. So I painted it, and the designer put it into different colors and print. It's silk print, but I draw it in my sketchbook. Also this.
And I have here a question of where can you purchase it in Israel? So it's in a few very select bookstores, but now CSP has a direct contact to Esther, and basically you can email me or her directly and purchase it from her. So that's...
yeah, I will be happy to send it to you.
Maybe Ari, maybe we can even gather whoever wants and send it in one kind of shipment too.
Sure. Do we have an idea of what the cost is?
It's 200 shekel.
The cost of the book itself is 200 shekels. Divide that by 3.1 at this point. And the shipping, I know. And the shipment. Yes. What's the name of the book? What is the name of the book? It's Afal Pi, no?
Yeah.
The painting I said, Afal Pi, nevertheless, which is literally means nose on mouth. That's the name of the book.
I don't know why, but it's about breathing for me. It's the most, for me, the face is really important. As you saw, I have many portraits, and also many of my paintings looks as if they are portraits, although it's a still life or something. But it's about breathing for me. It's the also Vayipach be'apav nishmat chaim. It's something about a connection to the divine.
What Esther just said in Hebrew was the quote from Genesis when God blew into Adam's mouth the life.
But it's mouth and nose, apav.
Yeah, apav. So actually in the Hebrew, the text itself, it's kind of like it was blown, all this, and not only into the mouth or the nose, but rather into both. So there are a variety of questions here about ordering and purchasing the book, and we'll gather those, and no worries, we'll make sure it gets to all the places that people want to encounter it. And I just want to see if there are any other questions that you'd like to ask Esther.
I have some questions that have come in. So as people ask more questions, can we take a moment to share them? So going back to the rabbis, the art, I mean, you mentioned Chabad. So we do have that tradition. If you go to a Chabad house, many people have a picture of the Rebbe in their house. Do people in Israel get upset when Esther takes the rabbi pictures and makes them into art?
I don't think so. I really appreciate, I'm coming from, although I have a lot of humor in my paintings, but I teach a lot of religious people and also even Haredic people. And I'm not patronizing. I'm part of it. I read some Hasidic, rabbis, and I really like it's part of my life. So, and it's part of my tradition. So I don't think I'm doing something that can be understood as offensive or something. But of course, it does something, but when I talk to people, I never had this kind of, I have never heard such things.
Another question. I left South Africa, where I was born. My family's been there for about 100 years now. And when I was 6, I moved to Boston, and I grew up in the United States. And I do not consider myself South African, and I have really, other than that I like South African chocolates, it does not play an important role in my life. But you left Russia when you were 1, and it seems that Russia plays a very important part in your role in your art. Can you tell us how that is, since you really grew up in Israel?
Yeah, so my parents really, like we were Russian speakers. My parents talked to us in Russia. All the children's literature and illustrations was in Russia, in Russian. And also for my parents, it was really important to preserve their tradition. Although they were really religious, but they were really connected to their culture, to their Soviet and Russian culture, rich culture. So that's how I was raised. And for me, it became really important, like to bring, I think that's why I became an artist, because I have to explain this complex identity that is a collage of really very religious, and like my father really learned a lot of mystic texts, and in another way we were really Russian. We were reading Pushkin and Mandelstam and speaking in Russia and going to Russia, so it was really a mixture. So I had to relate to it somehow, to combine, to understand.
I do want to add to that, and I think something of that also has to do with the fact that Israel is a country of migration, and Esther, and we're in a similar age. Many people of our generation are first generation here, either what came as babies or were born here to parents coming from a different country. And so the homes themselves look like a replica almost of somewhere else, whereas the outside is Israeli and this melting pot. And this dual identity is something that is, I'd say, quite common in Israel for especially this generation, and is very apparent in art. This meeting point between the culture where the parents came and the local culture and this double identity. So that's something that appears quite a lot in Israel, and especially in Israeli art.
Great, thank you. Phyllis Gilmore asks about, I noticed this as well, about the feminine aspects of the rabbis. And so I guess the question would be, Esther, when you paint, are you cognizant, purposefully painting, for example, men with a more feminine quality?
I think it's something irresistible for me. Like every portrait is a self-portrait, you can say, and I really like to twist it, because I feel we live in a culture that everything is so muscular, or I don't know, maybe I don't know if it's the right word to say, but everything is not feminine, like the painting. Of course, the history of painting, there's a very small part of women painters. So I really like to play with it, and it's all as if I do it not on purpose. It just happens, but I really do it on purpose. I like it.
Great. I mean, since you arrived in Israel, there was a big migration. Well, first of all, it's very unusual to have, I think, Jews who come from Russia who are religious, right? Because of the history.
Yeah.
So
my
your
parents
family
were really avant-garde. Yeah.
But since you arrived, obviously there was a big migration of Russians to Israel. How do you interact with this new group of Russians, and how do they interact with your art? Is there something? Do you speak to them? Do they speak to you, or are you kind of? Do they know you? Or are you part of this new group, or are you in your own group because you came in a different time in history?
I think we know each other. I was like, for me, it was really fascinating in the 90s when I was a small kid, but not very small. But I was like the bridge to the new Russian immigrants, and I really started to speak even better. I improved really my Russian, and I was like communicating with them. Today in the art scene, I think not like they know I'm Russian, of course, and I have many Russian artist friends, but I'm always in between, because I'm Israeli and I'm not really Russian, and I'm religious, and I'm also feminist, and like I was raised in Chabad, but I'm like, I don't know, I'm also meditating and practicing Buddhist meditation, but it's I'm always in between, so I don't really relate to specific community. I more like, I don't know.
Maybe I'll add also that within the art world, there is an interesting and quite prominent movement, the New Barbizon, which is a group of Russian women painters that came here in the migration of the 90s. And a lot of their art is about that, both bringing forward a specific way of painting, but also in a way telling the story of that migration. And it's very specific. And I think no one would group Esther with that group, because those are very different experiences and mindsets, and kind of, so that does exist within Israeli contemporary art. Possibly the most famous example is Zoya Cherkassky. But Esther is kind of coming in a way from a different mix of that tradition in a different time period, so it doesn't really meet.
For me, even I can say I'm also doing midrash in my painting, and not really painting. Like I'm a painter, but I'm interested also in the plot, in the things that I do with the text, with the meaning, with the culture, and not only depicting, I don't know, everyday life somewhere. Or like I like it a lot, but I don't do it. I do something else.
Then just a question. You've won many awards for your art, and you've been exhibited all over Israel. Have you had exhibitions outside of Israel, in Europe or in the United States?
And yes, I've been, like, I had an exhibition in Los Angeles in the AJU University, a dual exhibition with Avital Burg, which is an artist based in New York. I had an exhibition, I exhibited in Italy, in Moscow, and I don't remember, but maybe in more places that I don't remember, but mainly in Israel, I think. And I have a gallery that represents me in Israel. It's Roar Gallery. They have a studio in Israel. You're welcome if you're in Israel.
Okay, thank you. I don't know if I have anything else on my list other than what was your experience exhibiting in Moscow, going back to show your art there, given all the various backgrounds you have and all the challenges I would assume in Russia in general, with maybe many parts of your identity?
Actually, it was really strange for me and fascinating because they're really oriented, very commercial and very, and they don't really talk about their identity, and they're more trying to be international. That's how I felt. But it was really fun. It was snowy and it was next to the Red Square, and I ate good Russian food, and I met my aunt and my cousin, so it was great for me.
Great. And just are your collectors mainly in Israel? Or do you have collectors from other parts of the world as well?
Yeah, I have several in Sweden, in New York, in Vienna, in Italy, and in Israel.
Okay, well, you have people here. Maybe you'll have new collectors here in Southern California or the United States as well.
That could be nice.
Okay, Shirel, I'm done with my questions. So,
so thank you, Esther, very much. It's a pleasure to be able to show your art and be in conversation with you. And I hope you all enjoyed it and this visual trip in Jewish history, live visuals. Yeah.
Thank you, Shirel. It was really great.
And have
thank
a
you.
good day, I think. Yeah, it's day.
Yeah. I wanted to thank you both, Shirel, for putting together this great program. You should know that this is a program curated by Shirel. It was her idea, and she wanted the program on Esther. She put everything together. I did nothing. I just said, okay, Shirel. And then Steve Shulkoff, founding member of the Shirel Horovitz fan club, will tell you this is a rarity to find an artist who can speak and teach art like Shirel does. And that's why we had the idea of putting together a unique art venture to Israel. And you'll be hearing about it very soon. It's coming up in May. It's going to be a good time to go to Israel.
Yeah, come see us. Miss you.
You're gonna meet some awesome artists and learn about Israel through art in so many different ways. So, including food. So I'll be sharing it by email as soon as Shirel and I finish some edits that we have to the itinerary. And I hope if you have any questions, we'll probably have an info session online so you can join us, learn about the trip. But our goal is to meet artists like Esther and go to great places in Israel. And again, it's Shirel who'll be leading the trip and curating it with Rabbi Jill Borodin. I unfortunately I will not be on the trip, although I would like to be on the trip, but I have full faith it's going to be pretty awesome. So with that, everybody, have a great day. Shirel, any final words you want to share?
Just tell people about the trip? I'm still pretending you are coming on the trip in May.
Yeah, I would. But I got to be here because I have Toby Khan for the month. So he'd be very upset if I left him and went to Israel with you. Okay, everybody. Take care. Good to see you. And
bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye, Esther.
Bye.